Hey guys, welcome back to the MedBoys Podcast. I'm joined with my hosts, Rushil and Namin, and our guest for today is Lieutenant Dr. Daniel Parmar, who is a medical doctor and also a commissioned officer in the Canadian Army. How are you today, Lieutenant?
I'm doing good, guys. How are you?
We're good.
Um, we'll be switching through lieutenant and doctor a couple times, so don't mind us. But our first question would be, how did you get into medicine, first of all? In high school, was it the first thing that you wanted to do, or did you have other goals as well?
Yeah, I think, when I look back at high school, I think, it was by that point, I kind of knew where I wanted to be. I mean, of course, I always kind of have always adopted a strategy where you always want to keep the doors open. You don't want to close off other opportunities. But I think as a young kid, I was sort of exposed to a lot of different scenarios involving healthcare and medicine. My grandparents who were quite elderly and required a lot of complex care and geriatric care lived with us back in Oakville, and so part of that lifetime was really in young childhood is trying to take care of them, help your parents out as best as you can, right? Like, I mean, what do you know really at the age of 10? But then again, I started to learn all these weird things and medications and how to do things and stuff like that. And ultimately, by the time I got to high school, I was like, all right, I kind of know where my interests sort of lie. And, I think I was talking when I first met you guys, I was talking to you guys about, I think by the time I was in like grade 11 and I went to Oakville Trafalgar High School, which is the best. And, OT for anybody that ever watches this tomorrow, like it's the best school. I think by the time grade 11 came, there was a university fair. And I remember we went, I don't know if they still do it there, at the Metro Toronto Convention Center. And it was great. I mean, they had like all these booths set up and you get to go around and see all the programs. And at that time, I was really interested in like neuroscience, which is so, I don't know what's the word, ironic or serendipitous that you guys are all involved in that. And, and ultimately I didn't choose, I ended up going to medical sciences at Western, but I knew from, such a young age and, 16, 17 or whatever, that something in healthcare is where I wanted to go. I could see myself identifying with that. There was always a sense of duty and service, that you wanted to be involved in. And I think it's important, when you recognize that calling, to go explore it, because ultimately, duty and service can be, you know, sort of exemplified in many different avenues, right? But I think back in high school, when I started to put in all my personal experiences and explore, that was really sort of the initial starting points for where I ultimately got into, science and ultimately medicine.
So, Doctor, how was your experience in university? And from university, what drove you to actually take part in the Army training program?
So, are you talking about undergrad or medicine, like medical school, or both?
Undergrad. Undergrad.
Undergrad? Yeah, no, I think I did my undergrad at Western, and London, in London, Ontario, and London has like a pretty moderate sized base there on just by Oxford and Adelaide. And any which way, I think for me there was always this. It was sort of twofold. I think I sort of that idea of duty and service was always a big component, in anything I ever did. Whether it was volunteer work to this work, right? I always felt like I wanted to give back. I didn't know what was the best way to give back necessarily at, 18, 19, but I had an idea of where I wanted to go. With respect to the Army, it was actually kind of easy, though I wrestled with it for a little bit to see, is that, naturally the best thing? Because, when you're 18, 19, 20, you're not necessarily always the most responsible person at that time, and which is you have to be honest with yourself, right? But my family had a pretty strong legacy, like for I think we're going to four generations from my great granddad to the next generation, then my uncle, he was ultimately, I think, a lieutenant colonel in the army in India, and then currently, my generation today, I have a cousin right now, um, who I believe just retired, but retired as a full colonel in the Indian Army, and his sister was also a captain as well at one point in the service. So in reality, we always had this sort of family dynamic, and there was a proud heritage. And the Parmar family was always very intimately involved in giving back and fighting for our country. Um, and looking up to even like my cousins, like I said, more so than anybody, seeing because I was the youngest actually in my generation on my dad's side, and then these cousins are and actually my cousin, the ones I was talking about, were the first or second oldest, believe it or not. So there was almost this half a generation gap, but we're still the same generation, and you could kind of see all the great work that they were doing, and it was very inspirational. So it was between a family legacy and between having some generic interest yourself and seeing your family set sort of a great standard. I knew I wanted to take that ball and I want to elevate it. Like my goal always was to, not to replicate what anybody does, but was to take the ball from them or from whomever and then go score that touchdown. Like it was always to take it to the next level, to set a new standard. And hopefully the next generation will take the ball from me or whomever and set a higher standard from there.
Yeah, I think you did put the ball much higher with both doing medicine and with joining the army. But like medicine in itself is such a big thing. Like it's so hard to do, it's so hard to get in even. And then to pass through it, get into your residency, that itself is a very long process. So when do you think in your medical school career, like you actually decided that like the army is the way for me, and even like your residency, like your family medicine?
Yeah, great question, man. It's you know what? Again, I think it was never like this. Like I woke up on a Monday and I was like, I want to go to the army or Air Force or the Armed Forces. Like when I was, I gotta say maybe like 14 or 15. Like we have a small armory in Oakville, in downtown Oakville, on Lakeshore and Thomas Street. If you guys know Oakville at all. Anyway, which way, between that whole family legacy thing, I was like, I remember asking my dad, I'm like, Dad, I kind of want to join the, sort of what you can join at that young age, which I think, Rushil, you did, right? You were in sort of, yeah. So, I was really interested. And I always say to this day, I think my journey would have started way back then had they not been closed because they were closed that day. And then, you couldn't get in. And my mom wasn't the biggest supporter of her like 14, 15-year-old kid. And, it's only my brother and me, and I was the baby. So, it's how sometimes South Asian moms are, and, or maybe any mom is. So ultimately, then, you also get distracted as a teenager, but, I never stopped thinking about it. Like, I mean, you could ask my wife today, I always say, I'm like, even when I was going through undergrad, when I first met her, or, going through med school, I used to always think, I wonder what my life would have been like had I been in the armed forces, because I could always see myself clicking and like identifying with that. I always sort of prided myself on being a badass, but it was all in jest. But I said, sometimes to say something, it's easy to talk, but very few people walk that walk. And I didn't want to be a talker because that's, I always used to say to my wife, and I used to say this to anybody, if you ever met me, I never want to be a statistic. I never ever want to fall in the mass. I want to be, the outlier, and in a good way, right? You want to set a new precedent. You want to set a new example. And so with all those rumblings and all those sort of ambitious thought processes, I was done medical school by this point, and I was still thinking. I said, I think just that sense of duty and giving back that you do in medicine every single day, no matter what specialty you're in or what service you're on, and combining that with this, strong national pride, family heritage. I was thinking, like, how can I bridge these two sort of worlds, this beautiful duality I have, and connect that? When I started to explore more and more, with the armed forces, just simple, going on their website, talking to recruiters. Talked to a wonderful gentleman named Captain Jack McFarland. He's one of the superior officers, works in health recruiting. And, I ended up finding and clicking more with the armed forces, and this is where I got to be. And I want to make a difference, not only to serve, the members of the armed forces, but anybody in the community tomorrow, and to have that ability and flexibility, the portability, is something that you're not going to get working, say, at Sunnybrook or anything here in Winnipeg, right? Like, it's a very unique environment, and it's a very exciting environment, and that's the whole game. And I wanted that excitement, and I'm looking forward to getting it. So I always kind of say, bring it on.
You've already achieved it. You're an inspiration to all of us and all the people around you. But definitely, all the careers you've chosen, everything that you've gone into requires a lot of focus. I think that's important for every career in general. But as much as education is important, some people also think that the lengthy process of becoming a doctor, or going through that much education or all those years for nothing, just to go into med school and learn the same things again. Some people don't agree with going through undergrad, even Canadian doctors. There's programs in Australia, Ireland, England that go straight from high school to med school. So you've obviously studied a lot from what I see, undergrad, medical school, now the Army program. What's your opinion on that?
It's a great question. And I think for you guys or anybody listening, you got to recognize there's going to be a degree of bias, because I certainly went the one way, and I got to be in favor of that. I think going through undergrad, like a traditional bachelor's degree, for you guys at UofT, or for me it was Western, there's a lot that comes out of it more than the academic parts. It's you can't replace life experience. Now, someone can simply argue, yeah, of course, well, I can go get life experience in Ireland or Australia or the Caribbean or whatever. And true, fair enough, right? But there's a level, I think, when you go through undergrad, and maybe you guys can jump in and tell me what you guys think, but you guys going through your first year, and now you're in your second year undergrad, and you're really at that sort of that midpoint. And I think when you guys are going to look back, and hindsight's always 2020 when I say this, but you're going to look back and say, man, those 4 years, albeit ebbs and flows, there's some good and bad times and hardships, but man, was it worth it, right? Like, the people you meet, the interactions you have, the maturity you come out with, you can't replace that. And I think you grow up in a way, at Western, for example, I was involved with a lot of different clubs, met like 1,000 people, and there's some cool people. Some of the people I met there are some of my brothers from another mothers today, right? And we talk, and sort of shoot the shit, so to speak, all the time. And there's people that you just say hi bye to, and some what I call cartoon characters in the world of higher education that you don't really want to waste your time with, right? And that in itself is an experience, right? Like, that in itself, being able to recognize that, having that skill set, is kind of like a safety thing too. You also say to yourself, like, all right, like, do I want to be friends with this weird person? They might be weird, but they might be the greatest person inside, because they might be a little bit socially awkward and stuff, and they might be your brother, like your brother or sister tomorrow. And like, you don't know that before you go explore. And I think the difference from what I've seen, and again, it's remember, take it with a grain of salt, because it's my bias, but the individuals that I've seen that went straight out of like grade 12 into Ireland, for example, I knew a few people that went, or there was a couple because I went abroad. I finished my undergrad at Western, then I went to the Caribbean at a time where the Caribbean was like really starting to skyrocket, right? I applied in Ontario. I didn't get in ultimately, and I didn't want to wait for a whole year. Even though I had the marks and I had all this, it's just a competitive process. And I was of the mindset, I was like, I don't want to wait around for a whole year. What am I going to do? I don't want to play, Xbox all day long and, your parents don't really, respect you for that too much to begin with. So, I said, you know what, go get some life experience and get out there, go explore the world, and I was so glad I did. But in saying that, while here's an example. In my starting class in med school, I think there was about 60 or 70 of us, give or take, right? The numbers. Like it used to be sort of by semester because it was rolling admissions. By the end, my graduating class, at least for mine, and I'm not talking about like anybody who may have transferred in or, somebody that failed above me and came in. I just mean my core group. It was me and four other guys that graduated, you know, and that says that's not an ego thing, but that also I think the reason part of my success was having that mental maturity, because I saw a lot of guys crumble right under the pressure. They weren't able to cope with the high volume that comes with med school, the long hours, and some of them would go like spearfishing, which is great, but while you were spearfishing in the nice Caribbean Ocean, maybe you should have been studying something a little bit more, because ultimately you would have gotten through, right? And that's not a knock, but that's just reality. And you have to be real sometimes, and you got to be upfront. Otherwise you're just sort of BSing yourself. And a lot of those people I saw were people who came straight from high school in Mississauga, Brampton, or whatever. A lot of Canadians were at my school for some reason. um, and I saw a few that came in, and great guys, great people. But I just think one of their downfalls wasn't that they couldn't learn something; they just didn't have the mental maturity and the mindset, right? And again, I'm 34 now. When I look back at being, you know, 18, 19, 20, I was an idiot. I mean, that's just, and we all are. And I'm going to probably say the same thing when I'm, 44 in 10 years. Oh man, I didn't know anything at 34 when I met these three young guys, right? And you guys are going to be running laps around me. But I think that ultimately the decision should be up to the individual, because while I can give my opinion, or here's a success story, there's a lot of people that do well. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's a resident right now that I met way back when, who's in my program right now, and she was one of those candidates that went through like Ireland from high school, was from sort of back in the GTA. And so it's a case in point that it can be done, but it's just a very individualistic thing. So you don't want to ever stereotype to say, don't do it, because it's there for a reason. People go for a reason, and people are successful for a reason. But not a lot of people, you have to also look on the other side of things.
Yeah, that's a great point that you mentioned there. And I think that a lot of students currently living, or not living necessarily, but studying at universities, for example, we all study at the University of Toronto Scarborough. And as students that are currently being impacted by the pandemic, we are unable to go out of our way to develop these life experiences. For example, we can't go and do research in the labs. We can't even meet people in the pandemic. It's not even a question of whether the person that I meet is a weirdo. The question becomes whether I'll even be able to meet people or not. So, in light of all of these changes brought about by the pandemic, how does your perspective weigh in on that? How can students change their mindset to adapt to the pandemic?
I think just be open to opportunities, whatever comes. It's an evolving pandemic, right? I mean, and remember, a pandemic, it's not just us, right? It's not just Toronto, it's not just Winnipeg, it's the world. And in all fairness, while it's been hard for us, there's way more countries out there that have had it way, way, way harder. We're still pretty good. When I left Toronto, while things were kind of closing down, and I came here to Winnipeg June 13th, I think, last year. I mean, it was crazy, because I moved here, and I mean, you didn't even need to wear a mask. I was able to go down the street to like an Earl's and interact and socialize, right? And then as I started residency on July 1st, I want to say January, July 1st, I had started in 2 periods of obstetrics, and I think by the end of my obstetrics rotation, so to speak, that's when sort of the mask policy started to come in. And I remember going one day to the Walmart down the road here, and I remember they were starting to enforce this mask policy. And at that time, they were actually handing me the mask, which is great. It was like they were like, "Oh, here, we'll give it to you this one time," and I was like, "Fantastic, guys." Um, but I think that's been one of the challenges even for us, right? Like being new to Winnipeg, don't really know many people here. It's hard to socialize, even for young professionals like myself, right? Like I meet my residents and my colleagues every day in the clinic or on a different service, and we all talk about like, hey, it'd be nice to be able to go to like a Boston Pizza and go watch the Leafs game and have a beer, or whatever, right? Like whatever you guys do, or maybe it's like go bowling or something. But it's so tough when it's like limited capacity, and right now, even though things have opened up here, the rules have been changing all the time. So don't quote me on this, but at least the last I knew was like basically you can only go out with people in your own household, and you're like, well. What can you do if that's the case, right? But I think for you guys as young guys, be open to whatever opportunities are there. If anything, if this pandemic has taught us anything, guys, it's that what we are doing right now, Zoom, right? Or it was house party for like a brief period or something like that. Like, the virtual platform has really taken shape. And it's shown that communication didn't break down. It's shown that transactions and businesses can still operate, meetings can still occur, ideas and knowledge capital can still be exchanged. And I think as long as we're open to new ideas and new avenues to try to be able to network or communicate, it's one of the ways we're going to survive the pandemic. And especially for you guys, right, as young undergrad kids, where undergrad is part of the experience is to be involved in these social activities. And while you can't, necessarily modify, or go around the restrictions, there are ways to augment what we're doing, which is, doing this and trying to set up something to network, right? And you guys have a great platform now, I think, where you guys can reach a lot of people, which is fantastic.
Yeah, thank you about that. And then, like for us, at least, it's been this pandemic. But for you, like you're a very social person, and you've had to keep moving around from like Oakville to Western to the Caribbean, now to Winnipeg. So how have you maintained like your social life and like kept a sense of normalcy because it keeps changing every few years for you, right?
Well, it's funny. My staff actually said to me, we part of residency, and they have a new curricula that's been in place for a few years now in Canada, but it's called a competency-based curriculum. So you have these sort of assessments, midway through your services and stuff. And so we had a meeting the other day, and while everything was fine, she said to me like, "How the heck are you surviving?" Because and we laughed, and I said, "I don't know. Like my whole life is really work. Like I come here and I work, and then I go home at maybe I'll watch Netflix and play some Xbox or something like that, something to kill my time because I'm like I can't. Now thankfully the gyms have opened up, but I mean for almost a year I was like I couldn't even go work out. I got this membership at this fancy club, and you couldn't do anything, right? Yeah, it's been interesting. It's hard to socialize. I mean, really, the social aspect has come mostly from work, and it's very. I like to keep my work very, business minded. Like while I like to socialize and be fun, there's a time and place for that, right? I like to be all business when I'm at work. Like, if there's one or two guys or gals, whatever if you have a good rapport with, sure, you can joke around a little bit more. But other than that, I mean, it's hard. I wish I could really give you a better answer, but I think it's an evolving landscape right now. And to be honest, every week it's changing, right? Like sometimes restrictions are being lifted, so you're like, why don't we get together for a beer and go out here? But no, sorry, we can't do anything here now, and it makes it a little bit tough. But you can only do your best, right?
Yeah, no, I switched schools in grade 9. I went from one high school to another after half a semester, and I thought all odds were against me. But after meeting people like you, it's very humbling. But this might be a tough question, but I know you're recently started getting into your army program. But if you had to choose between just medicine or just army, at this stage, now that you've gotten some experience with both fields, what would you pick?
I think it's a great question, and it's a very tough question, but great question. But I think the easy answer is to always say medicine, but that's because I've been doing that, right? Like that's because I started that. Everything has come to it. Um, but the reality is, it's kind of impossible to pick one between the other because they're so different. They're not very comparable, but what is comparable is sort of that sense of duty and stuff. And to be honest, I'd just be honored to have any one of them. If medicine didn't work out, if the Caribbean never existed or whatever, I would have ended up doing. Like I remember I applied to teachers college or something at that time as well, and I'd gotten in, but I always kind of make a joke on I don't really have a lot of patience sometimes, so I don't know how I would have fared there. I think in all honesty, I'd probably say the army. While I've done all this stuff in medicine, which has been fantastic and it's given me a great life, um, I think more than getting a residency, more than whatever, I wanted to do something great, and like I want to dare to be great. I want to do something. You don't want to be, again, you don't want to be a statistic, right? I mean, there's enough people that go through CARMS or the NR whatever MP in the States, and they get their thing, they go work, and great, God bless, right? But I didn't want to be them, right? Then you're just kind of lost in the shuffle. For me, I want to be, I always prided myself, in my reputation was that, Dan Parmar is kind of a badass back home, and nice guy, but he's the Parmar brothers are a little bit different back home, and so I wanted to elevate that, to be more than, like I said, more than talk. I want to go walk that walk. And I think, ultimately, more than medicine, I'm more proud to be in the Army, to be an officer in the country, to have have a rank, have you get respect, and you have to earn that. Respect is not given; it's earned, right? And there's many layers to that. I'm going to be earning my stripes in different ways tomorrow when I'm working in that core environment when this is all done, right? No one's just going to say, no one's going to respect you if you're a crappy doctor, right? You have to work your way, whether it's with the pharmacists, whether it's with the med techs, whether it's with the medical, physician assistants. It's a dynamic team. And I'm so excited to be a part of that tomorrow and to help lead that or co-lead and learn from other people as well, because it's going to be a give and take. But I think I'm more excited about that than I ever was about medicine. And to be able to bridge that together, kind of like I had mentioned in an earlier answer, that's the ultimate. And, I think for me, ultimately would have been the Army one way or another.
It's so amazing how you're able to say that with such enthusiasm and such confidence, because I know a lot of people, when they look at the army, they automatically have this element of fear associated with it. My life is going to be at risk when I'm in the army. So is it really, worth it? And for you, the answer seems to be, I have this pride, I have this national pride that I want to, fight for my country, and I have this personal history attached to the army. So I really want to elevate myself and actually not be a number, like you said. So my question is, what will you actually be doing in this training program? What will you be doing after you actually get to your location?
So again, I think I'm not sure if we talked about it a little bit last time, but the MOTP, it's called Medical Officer Training Program, or MOTP. So again, I think I can't speak for any of the other trades or professions in the armed forces because they all have a component of training, right? But part of being a medical officer, which is what is the ultimate title, you are, you're a soldier first, but you're going to be, working as in a specific occupation. Part of it will be being a primary care or general duty medical officer for the members of the armed forces. So I'll be, providing healthcare to, the brothers and sisters of the armed forces, which is, keeping them operationally safe. There's a big component of occupational health that goes in, right? I mean, when you're looking at, I mean, while you probably will go on some deployments and stuff, which I don't doubt, there's a lot of people who do that more frontline, like the infantry guys, right? And keeping them operationally fit and healthy and safe is key to mission success, right? And so that's going to be a big part of it. Part of also being on a deployment, or anywhere is also, you might be not necessarily in a conflict zone, but you could be in a post-conflict or providing humanitarian aid. If there was like a tsunami or a flood or something, and you might be able to, provide healthcare to the local indigenous populations there. And I think that's also very exciting for me too, because, while it's amazing to, be in Canada, have this, world-class, high-quality standard of healthcare, it's kind of interesting to go for me to somewhere else. Even when I was in the Caribbean, like you see how different it is, and you really appreciate that, right? I mean, I can't speak for some of the other people that were there, but when I was living in the place I was living, like my water, for example, would be rainwater that would go from the eaves trough into a well. And then I would pump that that's what would go through my taps and my showers. You boil that, in a lot of ways, it's kind of like parts of India, or Asia, right? But it was so interesting to go from like not even a silver spoon, but a golden spoon in your mouth from Oakville to that. But it humbles you. And part of that too was, that it was kind of exciting, right? To be in that environment, to survive all that. I think to be able to apply my skill sets and knowledge tomorrow as a physician in the armed forces, as a medical officer, to not only keep my brothers and sisters safe so that we can have, mission success in the operational theater, but also be able to provide health care to the local, a local population or family. I mean, that's what excites me. You get the environment, you get the dynamic changes, which are going to come with anywhere you go, but that's what excites me, and that's part of what will, be happening. And I'll be working here at CFB Winnipeg unless they tell me to go somewhere else. But I'll be here until they deploy me somewhere. But I say I'm excited, so it's bring it on.
Yeah, I think all that water pumping and all those experiences really emphasize your like badass mentality, and it shows us just how like life shapes you and just what you mentioned before with the undergrad thing. Um, but I wanted to ask you, like you said your mom wouldn't be too happy about you joining when you were 14 or 15, but now that you've joined in your 30s, how is your family receptive to that?
Oh, no, they're great. They're great. It's just, you gotta understand the mentality is when you're 14, you're just a kid, right? I mean, even though I was a tall kid. I think I was one of the few kids who was like 14, 15 that had like a mustache or something. It was weird. I hit puberty pretty early, but you're still a kid by all rights. You're still a baby. So like, in a lot of ways I can understand the hesitation, right? I mean, for probably any parent, you just want to keep your kids safe. And I mean, that still applies today. And my mom's not like, all right, you're out of my hair, you're 34 or whatever, right? She still treats me like I'm 4 years old. That's a joke at home. So, and 30 years of a difference later, right? But, I think there's a difference too, because you're also your own person now. I've gone out in the world, and had very different life experiences and I've come out successful, thankfully. And that's not ego. That's just with a lot of hard work. And that didn't mean I didn't have a lot of lows, right? Yeah, you have to go through those lows to learn how to become successful. But I was very proud to do that, and I think with going through that, my parents were able to see, well, whether or not we feel one way or another, we can't stop him from doing what he wants to do. He's sort of his own man, his own person, and they give me a lot of respect with respect to that. Um, so I got to say, it's been a pretty easy transition. I think my mom is ironically more proud than my dad, and she'll always kind of joke around like, "Oh, you're an officer," yeah. But it's been a good one.
Yeah, moms are very protective. Like I think I mentioned this to you before. I was 10 and I went to my mom and I was like, "Hey, I want to join the army." And I think she didn't talk to me properly for a week after that. So so that changed. I wanted to ask you like a question that's been like pretty trending these days. It's related to the COVID vaccines. They've been saying that AstraZeneca has been, causing some problems. Well, I don't know if there's causation related to the results that they've shown, but they said that some countries have even suspended the use of AstraZeneca because they've, I think they've been causing blood clots. But again, they also mentioned that there is no causation between the two dilemmas. So, like, what's your say on that? Because like now that vaccines are more accessible, people are thinking about like, oh, which vaccine should I take? But then there's also officials saying, you shouldn't be picking which vaccine to take. You should just take the first one that you're given. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think I'm sort of in the same line. I haven't, to be honest, heard that there was sort of some blood clots. Again, you got to understand, some people, it could just be a coincidental thing. I mean, that some people might just be hypercoagulable to begin with. Or they could have some sort of like a, genetic mutation where their blood is more thicker. Someone could be using, I don't know, hypothetically, right? Speaking anabolic steroids, so their viscosity of their blood is a lot more. They could have other, heart arrhythmias like atrial fibrillation, and so they got to be on, maybe an anticoagulant to begin with, or they might have had a history of blood clots, like a deep vein thrombosis. It's hard to say. The fact that there's no causation tells you that, A doesn't lead to B, right? But I mean, you look at any medication that you take, whether it's Tylenol or Advil, everything has side effects, right? But we still take it, right? Because for the general sense, it's pretty safe, right? Unless you have some major contraindication to something, right? Like if you're taking what we call an NSAID, like an ibuprofen or naproxen or something like that, unless you have some like massive history of like a GI bleed, okay, you probably shouldn't be taking something like that. With respect to the vaccines, I think get it. I've always been of the mindset that it's better to be safe than sorry. And it may not necessarily always be you, who gets affected, but it could be your loved ones, right? Like my parents, my dad's in his 70s, my mom's in her 60s, survived cancer twice. Um, you know, for me, if I want to go back home tomorrow to go visit them, while I can still transmit it, it's still possible to get COVID even though you have the vaccine. So that's always important to know. But hopefully, it's less likely, or the strains, you'll be more covered for things, right? Um, but hopefully I can give some protection, and to myself, to my patients tomorrow, to my parents tomorrow, if I go, whenever I can go back home. But more importantly, to the patients that I see, right? Like when I'm working at a hospital, whether today it's the ER, tomorrow it's the, back at the clinic again, you want to keep everybody safe, right? We don't want to be an epicenter of a pandemic again. We don't want to see the numbers start to climb up. Yeah, no, I think it's important. There's a lot of, I don't know what's the word, gaga and stuff like that goes around over the years with vaccines, but none of it's true. It's all a myth, right? And sometimes it's really important to differentiate rumor and innuendo from fact. And I think that's, whether it's AstraZeneca, whether it's Moderna, whether it's Pfizer, if you can go get the vaccine tomorrow, like Shoppers Drug Mart or something like that, go get it. Keep yourself safe, most of all, and by doing so, you're keeping others safe. And that's why they're made available for a reason. They're not. It's not like buying juicy fruit out there at the drugstore, right? It's there for a reason, to protect you and to protect somebody else that's more vulnerable tomorrow, right? If you have a brother or sister who's got some sort of immunosuppress, or some disease that keeps their immune system a little bit more suppressed, and they're more susceptible to infections, think about that, right? You wouldn't want someone to hurt them, so why would you hurt somebody else? And again, it's important to be upfront like that.
Exactly. And of course, the biggest thing is to ensure everyone's safety and to consult expert advice and, know the facts and differentiate them from the rumors, like you said. And with that, I think we're going to be ending the episode of MedBoys for today. We'd like to thank you so much, Dr. Parmar, for coming on our podcast and talking to us, giving us your insights and some inspirational information to us all. from your experiences in the army to your experiences as a young child like all of us, you've definitely shown to all of us that it should be everyone's aspiration to not be a statistic. And also, on behalf of us and everyone watching, we'd like to wish you the best of luck no matter where you go. We just want you to know that we'll always be supporting you no matter what you do.